Hello, Matt's here, and today I'm going to do something quite different from my usual videos. I'm going to have a chat with ChatGPT. I'm going to talk to him about music and what music is, and see if we can come to some kind of conclusion between the two of us as to what that may be. Now, I'm not really trying to look for a definitive answer, although that would be really cool. I don't know if there is a definitive answer. I don't know if we even need to have a definitive answer. But I just thought this would be fun and a way of it kind of exploring, I guess, what AI's understanding is of music, and indeed reflecting on that myself, having been involved with music now for most of my life, in fact. You know, what is this thing that I'm doing day in and day out? Music is still very mysterious to me in many, many ways, but also very familiar in many, many ways. So let's see if I can kind of broaden my understanding of what it is that I've been playing around with for over 20 odd years and see if I can make any sense of all of this. So grab a cup of tea and let's dive in. Hello, ChatGPT. Today I'd like to talk to you about music and specifically what we mean by music, and maybe you and I can kind of come to some conclusion or agreement or maybe disagreement as to a definition of what music is and what music means. So perhaps we can start this conversation with you answering the question, what is music?
That's a great way to start. To me, music is organized sound, whether it's composed intentionally or emerges naturally from the environment. It typically involves elements like rhythm, melody, harmony, or texture, but it doesn't always have to include all of these. Music is a form of communication that can evoke emotions, tell stories, or simply exist as a sound experience, depending on the context. It's something that's deeply tied to human culture and perception, yet it can also be found in nature, like the sound of birdsong or wind.
Okay, that's really interesting. I just want to dig into a few of those things in your answer there. So first of all, let's start off with it being organized sound. So are you saying that music has to be intentionally organized, or can music derive from sounds that are just collected together organically without any intention, such as, for example, me tapping this pen and the sound of the wind outside my window? Is that music?
Music doesn't necessarily have to be intentionally organized. Sounds like tapping a pen or the wind outside your window could be considered music, depending on how they're perceived or framed. If we think of John Cage's 433, he demonstrated that any sound can be music if it's experienced in a certain context or with a particular intent to listen or engage with it as music. So even spontaneous or natural sounds can be music, not because they're intentionally organized, but because they can evoke meaning or response in the listener.
So are you saying, and is John Cage then saying that any sound, such as my pen hitting my hand, depending on how it's perceived by someone, would would um, would essentially define it as being a piece of music or not a piece of music?
Yes, that's essentially what John Cage was getting at. His work suggests that music isn't limited to traditionally organized sounds. Any sound, including your pen hitting your hand, could be considered music if it's perceived as such by the listener. For the experience of listening, the context in which it's heard, and the intention behind it can all contribute to defining whether something is music. So it's not necessarily about whether a sound is planned or structured, but about how it's framed and interpreted in a given moment.
So I suppose you could look at it the other way around, in that if I was to say, let's say I produced a sound and I explicitly said that that is not music, but somebody heard that sound and decided it was music, who is right, me or the listener?
In that case, both perspectives could be valid. You, as the person producing the sound, may have intended it not to be music, but the listener might perceive it as music based on their own context, experiences, or interpretation. Music, in this sense, is subjective. The listener's perception and the cultural or personal framework they bring to the sound can redefine it as music, even if the creator didn't intend it to be. It highlights how music exists not just in the sound itself, but in the relationship between the sound and the person experiencing it. So, neither is necessarily right or wrong. It's a matter of perspective.
Okay, so there's a few more things I want to dig into from your initial answer about what you think music is. And the other thing you mentioned was communication. You said that music was was a way of communicating or was communication. Um, can you just yeah, can you just tell me a little bit more about what you mean by that?
When I say music is a form of communication, I mean that it conveys meaning, emotion, or ideas, even without words. Music can express feelings, tell stories, or evoke particular moods or responses in the listener. It can communicate things that are hard to articulate verbally, like abstract emotions, cultural experiences, or personal stories. This is true whether it's a composed piece with specific intentions or something more organic, like the sounds in nature. For instance, in a piece of music with a slow, melancholic melody, the listener might feel sadness or introspection without needing an explanation. The structure, rhythm, and tone of the sound communicate something beyond the literal, tapping into a shared, sometimes universal, understanding of emotion or experience.
I understand, but I don't know if music can also express the literal, in that a piece of music, let's say without any words, would not be able to tell a listener to do something specific, such as put on their shoes, tie their laces, and walk down the road, turn left at the bottom of the road, and then come home without any words. So music cannot express the literal. Do you agree?
You're right in saying that music, on its own, without words or additional context, is not typically used to express literal specific instructions or actions like put on your shoes or turn left at the bottom of the road. Music generally communicates more abstract ideas, emotions, or atmospheres rather than providing explicit, literal guidance. However, music can suggest actions indirectly, such as motivating movement through rhythm or creating a sense of urgency, calm, or excitement. But it wouldn't convey precise, step by step instructions the way language can. So, in that sense, music expresses the emotional or atmospheric essence of a situation rather than the literal, detailed instructions or facts.
I guess we could use the example if a fire alarm sounded, that the listener would know that they need to evacuate a building. So in that sense, we're using a sound there to tell people to actually do something literally. Um, could could we, however, perceive the alarm to be a piece of music and perhaps mix up the literal intention of that fire alarm?
That's an interesting point. A fire alarm, while designed with a literal, urgent purpose to alert people to evacuate, could indeed be perceived as music, depending on context. The tone, rhythm, and repetition of the sound could be recognized as musical elements. For example, someone might find the alarm structure interesting or even hear a rhythmic quality in it, especially if it's heard outside of its intended context. However, the key difference is that while the fire alarm might contain elements of sound that can be interpreted as musical, its literal function is still clear and overriding. In this case, the perception of it as music might distract from its intended message, or it could mix the emotional or aesthetic qualities of music with the urgent, life safety message it conveys. The intention behind the sound, in this case to prompt action, and the context in which it's heard would influence whether it's perceived as music or simply a warning.
So I think we agree that context is really important with music, and that context can also imply and add an additional layer to the meaning of music. So you could play a piece of music in one location, let's say in a warehouse full of people at 3 o'clock in the morning, and you can also play that same piece of music in somebody's living room at 1 o'clock in the afternoon while they're having their lunch. And how do you think those two different experiences would be
Yes,
perceived?
exactly. The context in which music is played can dramatically affect its meaning, emotional impact, and the way it's perceived. The same piece of music can feel completely different depending on the environment, time of day, the listener's mood, or the social setting. For example, a piece of electronic dance music played in a warehouse at 3 a.m. could energize people, making them feel excited or immersed in the atmosphere. But that same music played in a living room at 1 p.m. during lunch might feel more like background noise or could evoke a completely different response, like calmness or even irritation. The setting adds layers to how music is experienced. It's not just the sounds themselves, but how those sounds interact with the people around them, the time, and the cultural or personal context.
Okay, great. Now, I'd also like to go back to something you mentioned about emotions. You've mentioned emotion quite a lot. And to my mind, there is no inherent emotion in music. To my mind, we apply our emotions to music through learnt cultures and context, if you like. What do you say about that?
I completely understand where you're coming from, and I agree with your point that emotions in music aren't inherent to the sounds themselves. Instead, we apply emotional meaning based on our cultural background, personal experiences, and the context in which the music is encountered. For instance, a minor key might traditionally evoke feelings of sadness, but that's not because the key itself is sad. It's because of the associations and learned responses we've developed over time, influenced by culture, context, and even exposure to other art forms like film. So, in essence, emotion in music is a product of perception and cultural conditioning. Music doesn't have an intrinsic emotional quality. It's how we interpret it, shaped by our own emotional responses and cultural frameworks. The emotional impact of music is not fixed, but fluid and subjective, making it more about how the listener interacts with the sound rather than the sound itself.
I completely agree. And something that often comes to mind is when I listen to Eastern music, and I'm in the West. I understand Western music to a large extent, but not Eastern music. So when I hear Eastern music, I feel hard to have an emotional understanding or connection with that piece of music because I don't understand it, because it's made up differently, because it's been developed from a different culture and used in a different context. What do you say about that?
That's a great observation, and it speaks to how much our emotional responses to music are shaped by cultural context and familiarity. When you're exposed to Western music, you're immersed in a particular set of rules, scales, rhythms, and structures that have developed in that context. So it's easier to connect emotionally with that music. Eastern music, on the other hand, often has different scales, like microtones, rhythms, and modes, which can feel unfamiliar or even distant if you're not accustomed to them. Your lack of emotional connection may stem from the fact that you don't have the cultural and contextual references to interpret the music in the same way. In many Eastern traditions, the emotional expression and purpose behind the music might not directly align with the patterns you recognize or the emotional responses you're accustomed to. Over time, with more exposure and deeper understanding of that cultural context, you might begin to connect more with the emotions embedded in that music. The experience of Eastern music can shift as you become more attuned to its unique characteristics and its role within the culture it comes from.
Okay, now I'd just like to ask a question or ask about an observation, which is that many of us find or we often kind of romanticize music in that it can bring people together, which I believe it can to an extent. But I also believe music can be used to divide people. And I wondered if you had any observations and thoughts on that.
You're absolutely right to point out that while music is often seen as a unifying force, it can also be used to divide people. Music has the power to bring people together through shared experiences, like at concerts or cultural events, where it creates a sense of collective identity. But it can also be used as a tool for exclusion or to reinforce boundaries between groups. For example, national anthems or specific genres of music can serve to solidify a sense of us versus them, often in a way that reinforces cultural, political, or social divides. Throughout history, music has been used in ways that manipulate emotions, whether to rally people for a cause or to create an othering effect. Think of how music was employed in wartime propaganda, or how certain types of music are used in political movements to promote exclusionary ideologies. Even within the music industry itself, genres or styles can create divisions, where one group might feel superior to another because of the music they listen to, creating a kind of cultural hierarchy. So, music can definitely be used to create a sense of belonging, but it can also highlight and deepen divisions, whether intentionally or unintentionally, depending on how it's framed or used in different contexts.
That's right. And many of us seem to gravitate towards a certain culture within music. So whether that's rock and roll or electronic music or folk music, or any genre basically, we tend to gravitate towards a particular style of music and essentially dress in the uniform that is appropriate to that style of music for a lot of those kind of examples. Why is that? What is that about?
The tendency to gravitate toward a specific music genre and adopt its associated style or uniform often stems from the desire for identity and belonging. Music becomes a form of self expression and a way to align with a particular cultural group or community. When you choose a genre like rock, electronic, or folk, you're not just choosing a sound, you're often choosing a set of values, attitudes, and aesthetics that resonate with you. The way you dress, the way you speak, and even the places you go or the people you surround yourself with can be influenced by that connection to a particular musical culture. Music acts as a social signal. It tells others something about you, your tastes, and even your worldview. For example, a person who dresses in a certain way to reflect their affiliation with a specific music scene is often communicating their shared beliefs or experiences with others in that scene. This can help create a sense of community where people with similar tastes and identities come together. On a deeper level, music helps people explore who they are or want to be, and the associated culture offers a framework for that exploration. It gives individuals a language to express emotions, thoughts, or ideals that they might otherwise have difficulty articulating. So it's not just about the music itself, but the collective identity it fosters and the sense of belonging it provides.
And why do you think specific people gravitate towards a specific style of music as their kind of go-to, their number one vibe that they like? And also, why do you think some people don't like specific types of music?
There are a few factors at play when it comes to why people gravitate towards certain styles of music as their go to, and why some people may dislike others. A lot of it comes down to personal identity, cultural background, and even psychology. Firstly, music often becomes tied to emotions and experiences. People might be drawn to a particular genre because it resonates with their personal life experiences, whether it reflects their emotional state, their upbringing, or significant moments they've gone through. For example, someone who has grown up in a household that listened to rock music might naturally be more inclined to gravitate toward that style because of the memories or emotions associated with it. Similarly, some genres may reflect an individual's personality or values. For instance, a person who feels connected to freedom and rebellion might be drawn to punk music, while someone who enjoys complexity and experimentation might be more inclined toward progressive rock or electronic music. Cultural and social context also plays a role. People often gravitate toward music that's popular or prevalent in the social groups they're a part of. Peer influence, community, and trends can strongly shape someone's musical preferences. For example, if a person grows up in a community where hip hop is the dominant genre, they're likely to feel connected to that style because it forms part of the cultural fabric of their environment. As for why some people don't like certain types of music, it can be a matter of how they perceive it emotionally, intellectually, or even physically. Like, for example, someone who finds certain styles like heavy metal or electronic too loud or aggressive might feel overwhelmed or uncomfortable with the sound. Our brains are wired to respond differently to different frequencies, tempos, and structures. So, what feels pleasant to one person might feel jarring to another. There's also the aspect of familiarity. People tend to like what they know or what they've been exposed to. If someone hasn't been exposed to a particular genre or style, it might feel unfamiliar or unintelligible, which can lead to disinterest or dislike. In essence, musical preferences are deeply tied to who we are as individuals, our emotions, identities, and the worlds we navigate. Our Our personal tastes are shaped by our experiences, environment, and how we emotionally connect to the sounds we hear.
Okay, and finally, I'd just like to finish off about this idea that music is actually maths. If we was to look at how we compose music intentionally and organize those sounds and create rhythm and structure and frequencies, we actually use maths. An example of that might be we have a tempo and then we divide and multiply, subtract and add in order to get divisions of that tempo to program music. We do the same with the sounds that we use, the frequencies. So if we have a song that is in the key of E, that has a frequency, and we will multiply, we will divide from that frequency, add and subtract in order to derive harmony and relationships to that key. Do you agree with that principle?
Yes, I absolutely agree with that principle. Music and math are deeply intertwined, especially in terms of structure, rhythm, and harmony. At its core, music is built on mathematical relationships. As you mentioned, the frequencies that define pitch in music are governed by mathematical ratios. For example, the note A4 has a frequency of 440 hertz, and when we double that frequency, we get the next A5, which is 880 hertz. The relationships between these frequencies form the basis of harmony and melody. Rhythm is another area where math is crucial. The way we divide time into beats and subdivisions, and how we structure those beats into patterns, like 4/4 or 3/4 time signatures, is also fundamentally mathematical. In electronic music production, for example, tempo, beats per minute, determines how fast the music moves. And from there, you can divide the tempo into various rhythmic units, like quarter notes, eighth notes, and so on. This is all done through mathematical principles of division and multiplication. Even more complex concepts like intervals and scales are built on mathematical ratios. For instance, the relationship between the notes in a major scale, like E major, follows a specific pattern of whole and half steps, which is mathematically predictable. Similarly, the concept of harmony, chords and their progressions, relies on the mathematical relationships between the frequencies of the notes that make up the chord. In essence, the organization of sounds in music, whether in terms of pitch, rhythm, or structure, can often be explained through mathematical concepts. It's a fascinating blend of art and science, where creativity meets logical structure.
Great. I like the way you've summarized that. Well, thank you for your time. Let's end this conversation by you summarizing for me based on everything we've spoken about today. In one sentence, I want you now to tell me what is music in one sentence.
Music is an organized collection of sounds shaped by cultural, emotional, and mathematical principles that communicates meaning and evokes responses through context, intention, and perception.
I think I agree with that largely, but I would probably say that it is intentionally or unintentionally organized. That's what I would add.
That's a great addition. It highlights the idea that even sounds not deliberately arranged can still be perceived as music, depending on how they are interpreted.
Great. Well, thank you for your conversation today. That's been really cool. And are you going to go and listen to some music now? What's your favorite music? What have you been listening to recently?
I'm glad you enjoyed the conversation. I don't have personal preferences or the ability to listen to music myself, but I'm always up for exploring different kinds of music and discussing it.
So there you go. Nice little chat between me and ChatGPT, trying to understand and come to some conclusion between the two of us as to what music is, and maybe that's something we can never fully understand or fully agree on or come to some defined conclusion on. But I think there was some interesting stuff in there that something for us to work towards if we really do want to try and define what this is. Do we even need to define what it is? I don't know. But yeah, if you've got any thoughts or ideas, questions, feedback, what's your thoughts on what music is? Put it down in the comments below, and let's see if we can get a conversation going. And maybe there'll be a part 2 to this. So yeah, thanks for tuning in, And I know this was a bit of a different video from usual, but yeah, why not, eh? Take care. Bye.